Good morning. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're learning Maseches Kiddushin Daf Lamed Gimel, which is the last blot of the year. And Baruch Hashem, it is a blot all about the mitzvah of Kibbud Av V'Em, as well as Kvod Chachamim, the Chulei. So let us jump right into today's blot. We're on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph at the end of the second line. Omar Mar, we had quoted this line yesterday, Yochol Yahadrenu B'Mamon, that in regards to standing up for people, maybe we should say that the Hidur is not to stand up for people who is a zaken. Perhaps it should be that we give them money. And yesterday we had responded, no, Talmud Omar Takum V'Hadarta, that we have these two words in the pasuk Takum and V'Hadarta. What's the link between these two words? Makima she'en b'chesron kis, av Hidur she'en b'chesron kis. No, it shouldn't cost you anything. Just like standing up doesn't cost anything, so too Hidur doesn't cost anything. So to this, the Gemara says that that's not necessarily true. V'kima les b'chesron kis. If a person stands up from what they're doing, is there not a chesron kis? After all, mi lo askinon dekanaki marganisa. Let's say that a person has a very unique skill set. He's a person with good hands, and he is making a hole in a pearl, which takes a tremendous amount of skill. Got to hold the pearl perfectly. Got to hold the drill perfectly. It's not such a pashat azach. It says the Gemara, if he's doing that, by the time he gets up and stands up, so now today he only accomplished drilling 50 pearls instead of 60 pearls. So he did take a loss. He absolutely did take a loss. So what do you mean that standing up has no loss to it? So it says the Gemara as follows. Ella, you're right. We need to relearn the hekish between takum and v'hadarta. Says the Gemara, Ella akish kima lihidur. We will see now a two-directional comparison between these two words. Kima is similar to Hidur, ma Hidur she'ein bo bittul. Just like when it comes to Hidur, we had learned yesterday that there's no bittul. Av Kima, so too when a person stands up. It should also only be in a case where she'ein bo bittul. And in the other direction, va'akish nami Hidur lakima, that as follows, there's a comparison between those two. How so? Makima she'ein b'chesron kis. Just like when a person stands up, there's no loss of funds. Hafidur she'ein bo chesron kis, and mikan, says the Gemara, from this double comparison, we learn the following very important rule in regards to standing up for people. Mikan amru ein ba'alei umnios resha'in la'amod mipnei talmid chacham b'shah she'oskin b'malachta. That if I'm working, I'm doing handiwork, whatever the case may be, if I'm on the clock, I'm not allowed to stand up when a Talmid Chacham walks by, because that's bittul melacha, and I'm on someone's dime. That's not required. That's not the way things are. Says the Gemara below, is that not true? After all, v'hatnan, a third of the way down, 2 lines before the wide lines on Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. We learned in a Mishnah, or I shall say, we will learn in a Mishnah, Maseches Bikurim, Kol ba'alei umnios, omdin mipneihem, v'shalim b'shlomam, v'omrim lehem achenu, when people bring their bikurim to the Beis HaMikdash, everybody who is a worker, they do stop, and they stand up and they say, Shalom Aleichem, welcome, what beautiful bikurim you have. And they say, you're our brothers from place X, Bo'achem l'shalom, it's great to have you. So what we see from here is that the Baalei Umanios, they do stop. They absolutely do. So if that's true, then maybe you're wrong. Maybe we should say that our hekesh that we made between Hidur and Kima, and then back the other way from Kima to Hidur, is not teaching us about this halacha the way that you taught it. And really, Baalei Umnius should stand up. Says the Gemara, no. Amar Rav Yochanan, mipneihem omdim, in front of the people who are bringing bikurim, yes, we do stand up in front of those people. Mipnei talmidei chachamim ein omdim. However, when a person is a baal umnius, when he's sitting and working, he absolutely should not stand up in front of a talmid chacham. Amar Rabbi Yossi bar Avin, bo urei kama chaviva mitzvah b'shaita. Come and see how beautiful it is when a person is fulfilling a mitzvah in a particular moment, that for the sake of that mitzvah, that when a person is doing bikurim, we do stand up for them. However, beautiful idea. If I'm in the middle of being osek b'mitzvah, if I'm doing the mitzvah bikurim, you can stop from being a baal umnius and you can stand up and give kavod to the mitzvah that I'm doing. But if a talmid chacham walks by while you're working, you may not. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Maybe that Mari Makom about the Bikurim isn't a good Mari Makom. Vidilma, shiny hasum, that case from Bikurim is different. If you're not warm with those people when they come to town, remember we had said just a couple of lines ago that what they say to the people bringing Bikurim is, Achenu anshe makom ploni boachem l'shalom. If someone comes to show you, welcome them, make them feel good and comfortable. They'll come back a second time. So the Gemara says perhaps there's no raya at all from the world of Bikurim, because perhaps the reason why the Mishnah in Bikurim says that we go out of our way to be warm and and doting and inviting is so that people will do the mitzvah again the next year. And therefore, there's no raya one way or the other in regards to whether or not we're allowed to do this for a mitzvah. So says the Gemara, therefore things are unclear on this one and we don't know. Amar Mar, about 6 lines or so, 5 lines into the wide lines, first words on the line. We had learned yesterday, Yachol Yamod Mipana Mibeis Hakise Mibeis Hamerchatz, that if a person sees a Rav in one of the areas of the mikvah, and if the Talmud was sitting down, they should stand up in front of the Rav. We said yesterday that they should not stand up. So says the Gemara, Velo, really? Is that true that they should not stand up? After all, he was in the bathhouse. Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, and Reb Shimon bar Rebbe passed by him, Velo kami kame, and he didn't stand up. Reb Chia did not stand up when Reb Shimon bar Rebbe walked by him. V'ikpid, and he was very upset that he didn't walk by. Again, it's not personal. It's not like I'm a Baal Gaiva and I need you to stand up for me, but rather it's that this is the din and you need to follow halacha. You should have stood up, which means that what we learned yesterday may not be true. We learned yesterday based on psukim that we should not need to stand up for someone in the Beis HaMerchatz. Yet over here we see that Reb Shimon bar Rebbe was makbid that someone should have stood up for him. And he went to Rebbe, his father, and said, Shnechu Mashin Shanisi, Lo B'Sefer Tehillim. I taught him 2/5 of all of Sefer Tehillim, all of the drushos that relate to 2/5 of Sefer Tehillim. V'lo Amad Mipanai, does he not view me as his Rebbe? Of course he should. And he should have stood up, even in the mikvah. So this is a very strong question. The Gemara says, V'su, let's double down. V'su Bar Kapara. We have another story about Bar Kapara. V'amri, some say it wasn't him. It was really Reb Shmuel bar Reb Yossi. Haba Yosiv. He was sitting in the bathhouse. Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, but same person was the Rebbe in this case, which is Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, and Reb Yossi, who was it? Reb Shmuel bar Reb Yossi did not stand up, or Bar Kapar, whoever it was, did not stand up. And then Reb Shimon went home to his father, to Rebbe, again and complained. He says to his father, Shnei shlish, I taught 2/3 of a third. Shanisi lo b'toras kohanim and sefer vayikra v'lo amad mipanai. So now we have a double strong question. We had learned yesterday that l'chora there's no din to stand up for a rav in a mikvah, in a bathhouse. Yet over here we have 2 examples: a Reb Shimon bar Rebbe, who was very upset that people weren't keeping the halachos properly, which implies that you're obligated to stand up even in a bathhouse. Amar lo shema pohen yoshevu meharher. Rebbe says back to his son, being done the kav schus. He says, yeah, but maybe, perhaps, my son, Reb Shimon, says Rebbe, perhaps the case may be that they're actually learning your Torah right now. They're busy, and when they're being osek b'Torah, they should not be standing up, and maybe they didn't even notice you because they're learning. And says the Gemara, we're going to make a diuk from this story. Taima de bohen yoshevu meharher. According to Rebbe, the only exception to them standing up would have been that they were actually learning the Torah that Reb Shimon had taught the students, and therefore they didn't stand up. Halav hachilo. But had it been that they were not learning, then it would not be the case that they should sit down, and taka, they should stand up. So it says the Gemara, that's the close of our question. We therefore see that there's a very strong hint, a strong reference to the fact that there is a din of kavod, of standing up, even in a Beis HaMerchatz. The Gemara says, Lo kasha, ha-bevate gavoy, ha-bevate beroi. It depends. In the inner sanctum of the bathhouse, where people are not dressed properly, as the Rishonim point out, so then in that case, it's not an appropriate place to stand up. However, ha-bevate beroi, but in the outer part of the mikvah area of the bathhouse, where people do have their clothes on, then taka there is an obligation to stand. So the Mishnah that we learned yesterday, not the Mishnah, but the drasha that we learned yesterday taught us that really you have no obligation to stand up for a rav in a bathhouse. That's in the inner sanctum where people are not clothed. However, in the outer areas, you are obligated to stand, and that explains all of the Mari Makomos that we've seen, all the stories. By the case of Reb Shimon, when nobody stood up for him, so the reason he was makbid is because it was in the outer part of the bathhouse, and the taka should have stood up, so he had every right to be makbid. The Gemara says, Achanami mistabra, halfway down, about almost halfway into the wide lines. A little bit more than halfway down on the page, because this is a logical response to make a distinction like this between Bate Givoy and Bate Beroi, the inner and outer sanctums of the bathhouse, because, says the Gemara, the Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana Amar Rav Yochanan, The Gemara says that there are some places where you're not allowed to think about Torah, and the inner sanctum of the bathhouse is one of those places. And therefore, in those places where a person is arum from clothing and they're not thinking about Torah, there's no din for anyone to stand up for them. Says the Gemara, that's not a good argument, because Dilma La'on say shiny. Maybe someone can't help but to think about Torah, and maybe you should stand up for them. So a lack of clarity over here in regards to the final aspects of this din. Whether or not this is a good answer, we don't know. Analyzing another thing we said yesterday in regards to standing up for people, the Gemara says over here, 2/3 of the way down, let's say perhaps a person decided, you know what, I want to close my eyes and not stand up. So says the Gemara, are we dealing with evil people that are going to be rude and intentionally not stand up when a Rav is walking by just by closing their eyes? So says the Gemara, Ella, that's actually not what the question was. It wasn't, can I intentionally avoid this once I'm chayiv? The question is, am I chayiv altogether if I see him coming from far and my eyes are closed from now until the time he passes? I never entered into the state of chiyuv whatsoever. We're going to soon see that with certain people, the requirement, I should say, of standing up is only Daled Amos. So let's say I see the Rav of our Shul, I see Rabbi Shechter, Rabbi Robinson walking toward me. And it's a scenario where it's appropriate for me to stand up. So if they're outside of Daled Amos, that's where this question is happening. They're 20 feet away from me. I close my eyes, squeeze them, wait till they pass by. But if they're within Daled Amos and then I close my eyes, that's not the question of the Gemara. We're asking about beyond Daled Amos, beyond the point when the chiyuv has begun. So there the Gemara says, so what would you say in such a case like that? So that's where the Gemara yesterday was highlighting what really is correct. And that is Talmud Lomar, Takum v'yarei. So you should stand up and you should have proper yiras shamayim and proper kvod chachamim. You should not try to avoid the scenario by closing your eyes. Says the Gemara, as was just referenced, Tana, we have a brisa. Ezehu kima sheyesh ba hidur. What type of kima is the type of kima that also has hidur? So it says the Gemara, Habayomer zed Daled Amos, that one is obligated to stand up when they are within Daled Amos. Amar Abaye, Abaye says, Lo amran el birabo she'eno mufhak. This is only true of a regular shul community rabbi, of a regular Rav, your average Talmud Chacham. However, aval birabo mufhak, for your Rabbo Mufhak, and this is often defined in the Rishonim as the person who has taught you most of your Torah, so then that's different. If it's Rabbo Mufhak, then Melo Einav, as long as you can see him, even beyond Daled Amos. So let's say, Ledugma of David Miller, who's for sure my Rebbe Mufhak in regards to halacha, if I see him from a mile away, if I can see him, stand up. Obligated to stand up. No din of Daled Amos by Rebbe Mufhak, that's Melo Einav, as long as you can see them. And let's talk about some stories about how makbid people were about this idea. Abaye, miki havachazi le leudne dechamra de Rav Yosef. When Abaye would see as small as the ear of the donkey of Rav Yosef, to Asi, that it was coming forward, Havakayim, he would instantly stand up. He knew what was coming, he stood up. That's Melo Einav. Abaye have a rachiv chamra, and now the next generation, when Abaye was the Rebbe, he was riding on a donkey. V'kamaske aguda de Nahar Sagya, and he was riding along the banks of the Nahar called Sagya. Yasiv Rav Mesharshia v'Rabbanan beidach gisa, and across the way, across the water, he was able to see Rav Mesharshia was learning, and other rabbis around him. These were his talmidim, and they didn't get up. Below kamu mikame. So he called out to the chevra. Amar Lu, he says to them, V'lav Rav Muvhakana. Am I not your Rebbe Muvhak? Why is it that you're not standing up? That is very odd. Says the Gemara, says Rashi, Rashi is 4/5 of the way down, 20 lines from the bottom of the page. Dibur hamaschil, v'lav Rav Muvhak ana. So Rashi says, v'afal pi she'atem rechokim yosem midaled amos, iboya l'chula mekam. When it comes to Rebbe Muvhak, Daled Amos is not the measure. You need to stand up. There's a chiyuv del raisa for you to stand up. So Abaye called him out. Amr lahu, they said, oh Rebbe, 100% correct. Lavadaitin, we didn't even notice. We were steeped in our learning. Says Rashi, Lavadaitin, Lonis Karnu La'amo Chainu Trudim. We were distracted by our learning and we didn't remember to stand up, but 100% you're correct. At the 2 dots, 10 lines or so from the bottom of the page in Lamed Gimel Lamed Aleph. Says the Gemara, Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Minayin lezakein shelo yatriach. Again, this is all of today is just an analysis of yesterday. How do we know, says the Gemara, that a person who's a zaken, for whom others will stand up, how do we know he should go out of his way to make sure that he's not forcing people to stand up? So says the Gemara, Talmud Lomar, zaken v'yaresa. Based on the psukim of zaken v'yaresa. That was the din we learned yesterday. Now let's analyze. Amar Abaye, Naktinan, we have a tradition. Di'imakif chaye, that if a person circumvents the crowd in order to minimize their standing up, that will bring them to a longer life. Abaye Makif, Reb Zera Makif, these two Amoraim were very careful to be Makif. They would only create scenarios of people standing up when there was no choice but to do so. Ravina Hava Yosef Kamid Rav Yirmiyah Midifti. Ravina was sitting in front of Rav Yirmiyah Midifti. Chalafahu Gavra Kameh V'lo Mechsi Reisha. And there was a person who walked in front of him who wasn't covering his hair properly. At that time, it was considered respectful to wear a certain hair covering when you're in front of a Talmud Chacham. Omar, so he responded, Kama chativ hai gavra, this person's so rude. They're not wearing the appropriate hair covering, and they should be. I'm a Talmud Chacham, I'm a Rebbe Muvak, whatever the case may be. They should be dressed properly. It's not right what they're doing. So says the Gemara, Amar le, Dilma mimata mechasya nihu, tegise be rabbanan. Maybe they're from Mata Mechasya, where they have overly warm relationships with their Rav. Fascinating answer. Is that a cultural insight? In which case, did they do something wrong in Mata Mechasya that they're so close with their rabbis that they can let their hair down? We see a lot of that in our generation with Tador Mechutzafin, where people talk back to the rabbis. It's mamash aser. There's probably no heter for such a thing, basically. So that's our generation. But what does it mean for Mata Mechasya? Does that mean that they had a different culture and therefore it was mutter, a different culture and therefore it was aser? Subject to debate. I don't know the answer. 6 lines from the bottom at the two dots. Isi ben Yehuda, according to Isi ben Yehuda, as we saw yesterday as well, he was of the opinion that in front of any older person, seemingly Jewish or not, as we'll see in the Gemara, a person should stand up when an older person walks by. And the Gemara says, Amar Rav Yochanan halacha ki Isi ben Yehuda, we paskin like him. Rav Yochanan haba koi mekame sabe de armoi. Rav Yochanan would stand up in front of Armenians, non-Jews, who were older. They weren't Talmidei Chachamim, that's for sure. They weren't B'nai Torah, they weren't Yidden. But he stood up anyways. Omar, Kama harpatke adu alayhu dahani. How much harpatke have they gone through in their life? Harpatke, 8-9 lines from the bottom in Rashi, Dibra Maskal harpatke. Mikros, things that have happened to them, vitzaros, and tragedies that have happened, vira'u nisim harbe, they've seen a lot, umofsim. These are the people they've seen a lot. When they have a lot of things that happen to them, automatically they become subject to being a zaken. By definition, it's just the nature of life experience. And therefore, one should taka stand up, even before, at least according to Rav Yochanan, a goy who is older. Rava mekam lokoi. Rava was a little more makbid. He would not stand up for them fully, but hidur avad lahu. He would bring himself out of his chair a little bit in order to give a little bit of kavod. Abaye yohiv yada l'sabe. Abaye would basically lend a hand to help people as was necessary in order for them to cross a bridge, cross over some water, but he would be supportive of the average goy as they were traveling. And Rava Meshader Shluchei, Rava would send his servants, and Rav Nachman Meshader Gozai, Rav Nachman would send his officers. Rav Nachman was a very chashuv person, ayin in the Rishonim. He was a very chashuv person, and he always had an entourage of people around him. And in order to support the goyim, he would take a Gozai, and that is the people who he would send. Omar, why didn't he do it himself? Because says the Gemara, if I don't sit and learn, ilav Torah, kama Nachman bar Abba ika beshuka. I'd be like everybody else. What makes me unique is the Torah that evokes the kochos within me. But if the Torah doesn't evoke the kochos within me, then I'm just a rather regular Nachman. No, there's a bunch of people like me. Without the Torah, we're regular. With the Torah, it draws out our deeper kochos. It brings them to the surface. It brings us to self-actualization. And Rav Nachman said, I can't do it myself because I can't be mavatal the Torah because that minimizes who I'll become. But I'm willing to send my entourage to go support the average zaken armoy. Amar Rebbe Ivel, Amar Rebbe Yanan, turning to the top of Daf Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, the final turn for the year. The Gemara says, Ein Talmud Chacham Rishai Lamod Mipnei Rabo Ela Shachris Ve'Arbis. A Talmud Chacham, a person who's in the base medrash, is only allowed to stand up for their Rebbe twice a day. Because we don't want it to be that I, as a student, will stand up for my Rebbe more times than I show up to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Discussion here, are we talking about Kriya Shema? Are we talking about Shmona Esrei? But basically, we serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu morning and night. That's twice, even though we say 3 Shmona Esreis a day, but it's morning and night. And here, therefore, Ein Talmud Chacham Rishai Lamon Bibnei Rabo Ela Shachris Varbis. Says the Gemara, wait 1 second. Meisvei, we have a brisa. Reb Shimon ben Elazar Omer, Minayin lezakein shelo yatriach. Remember the Gemara that we learned just a few minutes ago. We had learned that a zakein is not allowed to intentionally cause people to stand up. And says the Gemara, Talmud Omer, how do we know that he's not allowed to do that? Because we said zakein v'yaresa. We had said that based on the juxtaposition of the psukim of zakein and v'yaresa, we learned that it's not allowed for a person to cause others to stand. Now says the Gemara, v'i amris shachris v'arbis bilvad. If in fact there's a chiyuv deoraisa for shachris and arbis, so then amai lo nitrach. If in fact there's a mitzvah d'oraisa for me to stand up for a Rav, the Rav Taka should, at least once in the morning and once at night, walk by me, even intentionally, to give me the mitzvah to stand up for them. So it says the Gemara, chiyuvahu. Elolav, it must be kula yome, pushing back on the Gemara. The Gemara says maybe our approach on the top of this page is wrong. The shita that we quoted on the very top of this page is Rav Ivo in the name of Rav Yana, and he said you stand up twice a day. And basically from the brisa that quotes Rav Shimon, it seems to be that we should stand up every single time. So the Gemara responds, Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis, 6 lines down, 7 lines down. Lo, that's not correct. Lo lam shachris v'arbis bilvat. Really, we should only stand up twice, and the Rav should and could make sure that happens morning and night. Ve'afilu hachi kama de'efshar lo nitrach. But more than that, one should be careful not to make it happen anymore. You should be careful. Let's say the dugma, a person has an opportunity to walk through a private entrance that from the mizrach of the shul to his seat, much shorter than walking past 100 people. So says the Gemara, that's considered appropriate. 8, 9 lines down, Lamed Gimel Lamed Beis. Amar Rebbe Elazar, Kol Talmid Chacham she'eino min mipnei Rabbo nikra Rasha. If you have a Talmid Chacham who doesn't stand up from his Rav, that person is called a Rasha. Not only is he called a Rasha, ve'eino ma'arich yamim v'talmudo mishtakeach. He will not have a long life, and he will not remember his Torah. Shne'emar v'tov lo yihye. Tov is a reference to Torah. He will not have goodness, l'rasha. V'lo ya'arich yamim, and that was the second thing he said. Kitseil asher einenu yarim milifneho Elokim. So says the Gemara that based on this pasuk, he had a problem. Mo razu eni yodei mahu. Based on the pasuk where it says asher einenu yare, 1 line above, I don't know what that's talking about. What mora do we have to fulfill? What fear do we have to have? When it talks about standing up for people, and the pasuk says, I therefore know that this pasuk is talking about standing up, and that's how Rabbi Elazar had concluded that any Talmid Chacham who doesn't stand up before his Rav is called a Rasha. His life is shortened, and he will forget his Torah. Whatever the case may be in regards to specific applications of this case, we should be makpid gomor, that whenever we're in a scenario where we could stand up for a Rav, we most definitely should. Of course, when they walk by, when they get aliyahs, any opportunity we get, we should capitalize on the opportunity, first and foremost because halacha l'maisa we're required, and second of all, because this is a sharp Gemara that tells us that we are begeder rishayim, there is a shortened life, and we forget our Torah. All 4 motivations are great. Says the Gemara, that's nice that you learned what Mora meant from the pasuk of Yaresa Elokecha about standing up from people, but there are other psukim that also talk about Yira. Ve'ema mi moras ribis, moras mishkalos. There's other psukim in Chumash that talk about Yira by ribis and by mishkalos. Mehecha tesi that the Mora in this pasuk, that's the pasuk of a couple of lines ago, the one that Rabbi Elazar used as his Mari Makom, where it says, maybe we're not talking about standing up. Maybe that means you shouldn't do ribbis. So Rabbi Elazar answers pnei gomar. He has a gzera shava. One pasuk says milifneho elokim. That's the pasuk we saw 4 lines ago. And then there's our pasuk of mipnei seva takum. So therefore, his gzera shava teaches us that we therefore know that there's a link between being a Rasha, having a shortened life, and the third one is that you'll forget your Torah and not standing up for people. So we should do our very best to be makpid gomer. 1/3 of the way down, the Gemara asks a fascinating question. Let's say that you have a son. He's the Rosh Yeshiva. His father happens to be a Talmud in the yeshiva. Okay, the son's Nilu, he's 25 years old. He goes into yeshiva. His father's 45 years old, and he's the Marad Asra. He's the Chash of Talmud Chacham. So says the Gemara, does the son still have to stand up in front of the father? It's a bit of an odd question. Why does his obligation dissolve to be a son? Okay, the Gemara says, Tashma, let's see. De Amar le Shmuel Rabbi Yehuda. Shmuel says to Rabbi Yehuda, Shinana, kum mekame avuch. He says to Rabbi Yehuda, who was Taka, the father, the son who was the Rebbe of his father. He says, you need to stand up in front of your son. Says the Gemara, that's not a raya for anything. That's not a raya that a son has to stand up when he's the Rav and his father is the Talmud. Why? Shani Rabbi Cheskel was Rabbi Yehuda's father. The Bal Maisim Haba, he was a tremendous Bal Maisim. And therefore, says the Gemara, Dafilu Mar Shmuel Nami Koim Mikame. A lot of people stood up for him. So you can't bring a raya from that case where somebody tells Rabbi Yehuda, stand up for your father, Rabbi Cheskel. Pashut, he's going to stand up for him. He's a Baal Maisim. Says the Gemara, Ela Maiko Amarle. So then what was he talking about? If the father was a Baal Maisim and he's the father, Pashut, that the son, even if the son is the Rosh Yeshiva, Pashut, the son's going to stand up for his father. So says the Gemara, here's what's really going on. Hachi Kamar, 6 lines before the wide lines. Zimnin da'asi me'achorai. Let's say the Rebbe's walking toward a particular young man. This young man is the Rebbe of his father. So you have let's say you have Chaim is the Posek Ha'ir. And Ruvain is not the Posek Ha'ir. He's the Rosh Yeshiva, Chaim is the Rebbe of Ruvain. So then Ruvain is sitting in shiur, listening to his Rebbe Chaim. Now Rebbe's Talmud, who's his father, is behind Chaim. So says the Gemara, Zimnin da'asi me'achorai. I might be facing you, the child. Chaim might be facing Ruvain, and Ruvain's father, who is Ruvain's Talmud, might walk by. Kum at mikame v'lo techush liyikra didi. You should absolutely stand up, and do not worry about standing up while I'm giving shiur. You should stand up for him. So therefore, again, with an ad havamina, the Gemara concludes seemingly very clearly that a son is obligated to stand for his father, no matter what the scenario is, even if the son is the Rebbe. Another iteration of this is not about the son standing up, but if the son is the Rebbe and the father is the Talmud, does the father have to stand up for his son? Ibailu beno v'hu rabo. Does the father have to stand up in front of his son, the Talmud Chacham? So says the Gemara, halfway down, 4 lines before the wide lines, let's take a look. Toshma. And we're heading toward the bottom of this page. We'll be stopping 2 lines from the bottom. And then on Rosh Hashanah, we'll do Daf Lamed Daled. On Rosh Hashanah, day 2, we'll do Daf Lamed Hey. And then we'll be in the saddle. Let's go. Toshma, the Gemara says, again, does the father stand up for his son who is the Rebbe? To Amar Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. Ani eini kedai la'amod mipnei beni ela mishum kavod beis hanasi. He seems to say, Rabbi Yeshua, that I'm not going to stand up for my son, not in his own merit, but only because of the kavod of the beis hanasi. So says the Gemara, Taima de ana rabbe. That's only true because I'm his Rebbe, says Rabbi Yeshua about his son. And the diuk is, last short line, ha'ihu rabbi, if he was my Rebbe, then ko'imna kameh, then taka, I would stand up. So the Gemara suggests that it's possible that a father should stand up for his son if the son is the Rebbe. So says the Gemara, hachi kamar, no, you misunderstood. Ani eini kedai lamod mipnei beni ve'afiluhu rabbi. Says the Gemara, factoring in a little bit more language here. I would not stand up for my son, even if he is my Rebbe. Ana avuha. I'm his father. The chiyuv is not the way that you think. It's the natural way. It's not the way of a Rebbe the father standing up for his son. Ela mishum kavod beis nasi. So the Gemara rejects this outright. A father does not stand up for his son, even if his son is the Rebbe. 2/3 of the way down, second of the wide lines. Let's say your father is riding on a horse, or let's use an equivalent. Your father is driving in a car, and your father drives by, and he's within Daled Amos. Do you have to stand up? Yes or no? Is Rachov k'mehalech dami, or is Rachov eno k'mehalech dami? So let me just read the whole question. Rachov k'mehalech dami olo. Amar Abai Toshma. Let's try and learn from a case of Metzora. This case is a complicated case. We'll explain it on the surface level, and when we get to this properly in what Masech is this in Maseches Negoim, then we'll learn it in more depth. If you have a tameh, you have a person who's a Metzora. He's Yoshev Tachas Ilan. He's sitting, under a tree. V'tahor omeid, and a person who's not a Metzora. So let's say I'm a Metzora, and I'm sitting down. You're standing next to me, not sitting, you're standing next to me under a tree. The din is tameh, I make you tameh tumas ohel. Tameh omeid tachas ilan. Let's say that the tameh, the Metzora, is the one who's standing. And the tahor yoshev, and the tahor one is sitting. So says the Gemara, tahor, that person does not get tuma, and he is considered to be tahor. If in fact the person who is a tameh sits down, then a tahor tameh. So something about the Metzora sitting down, again, this is the part we're not digging into, but when the Metzora is sitting down, then tumas ohel kicks in. When the Metzora is not sitting down, the tumas ohel does not kick in. And then says the Gemara, v'chein ve'even hamenugas. This is the part that's important for us. Even if a person is holding a stone. Now, what that means is that if a person becomes tameh themselves, the same thing is true about a stone that they hold. That's very similar to the idea of rachuv kimahalech dami. That which is sitting on the horse, let's say a father sitting on the horse, has the din of the horse. Okay, so then all is well and good. That's the Gemara's comparison. Therefore, we're not poskim, but if we were, we would say that if a father drives by with his car and he's within the appropriate metrics of where you are, then you are obligated mida oraisa to stand up for your father in such cases. Says the Gemara, 3/4 of the way down, 5 lines into the wide lines. Another question. Mahu la'amod mipnei sefer Torah. We do this all the time. It's in our bones. The second we hear the curtain open, our brains turn and we stand up. Says the Gemara, Rav Chilkiah, Rav Simon, Rav Elazar, Amri, the 3 of them said a kal v'chomer. Mipnei lomdeha omden, mipaneha lo kol shekain. You're going to stand up for the Rabbanim of our shiur. You're going to stand up for Rabbi Robinson and Rabbi Schechter. You're not going to stand up for the Torah that made them who they are. Pashut, you're going to. Obviously. Rav Eloi, Rav Yaakov bar Zavdi, Havu Yasve, they were sitting down. Chalif Azil, Rav Shimon bar Abba, and Rav Shimon bar Abba walked by them. V'kamu mikame, and they stood up when he walked by. Amar lahu, he said to them, pushing back on what they did. Chada, first of all, de'atun chakime, you guys are very wise. V'ana chaver, I'm just a pashut yid. You should not be standing up for me. V'od, klum Torah omedes mipnei lomdeha. What's going on here? What about the Torah? You guys are the embodiment of Torah. So for you, Pashut, I should stand up for you, but that's not me. I'm not one with the Torah, so you should not be standing up for me. And it must be that Savar Laka Rebbe Lazar. It must be that he held like the sheet of Rebbe Lazar. Damar Rebbe Lazar, Ein Talmud Chacham Rishai La'amod Mipnei Rabo B'Shah She'osek B'Torah. That a Talmud Chacham, this Talmud Chacham is a student, he is not allowed to stand up before his Rebbe at a time when he's learning Torah, and layet Allah Rebbe. Rebbe cursed this out. He said that's not correct. Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom, middle of the line, Dibra Hamaschil, layet Allah Rebbe, ahach the Rebbe Lazar, kolman detzayisle. He pushed against Rebbe Lazar to say that yes, you do stand up in the middle of learning. You do if a Talmud Chacham walks by. And I got it. The Gemara says that the 2 dots, 8 lines from the bottom, and we don't know people were watching him. Were they watching him for good or for bad? Rav Ami Rav Yitzchak Nafcha, the Amoraim have a machlokes about this. Chad Amar Lignai, one says that this pasuk is highlighting a negative about Moshe Rabbeinu. V'chad Amar L'shvach, and some say that it was a good thing. Man de Amar Lignai Kiddushin. According to that, those who have a negative view of this pasuk, that something negative was being said about Moshe, that's Kiddushin, as it was stated, which it wasn't stated anywhere near where we are. It is stated in the Midrashim, and Rashi quotes this. Take a look at Rashi, 3 lines from the bottom at the end of the line. Dibur Hamaschil Kiddushin. Mishum dedavar megunahu l'ratza lefarsima. The Gemara doesn't even want to talk about it. And therefore, B'harei Mufurish B'medrash, the Medrash writes it in the Medrash of Rebbe Tanchuma, Ru'u kama avim shokav, his legs are thick, and kama tzavaro shamein, he's gained so much weight, hakol mishalanu, he's taken our money, some type of claim against Moshe, that he was taking things for his own benefit. And that's what it means, Kiddushin, that there was a medrash that speaks about the fact that there were those who viewed Moshe in a negative light. And Manda Amar Lishvach, those who say that it was a compliment, Amar Chizkiya, Amar Li, Reb Chanina, Bered Rabbi Abo, Amar Rabbi Abo, Amar Rav Avdimi Dimin Chaifa, Chacham Over, Omeid Milafanav, Dalet Amos. If a Chacham is passing, you should stand up when he's within Dalet Amos. V'chevan she'avar Dalet Amos, that's when you should start standing up. And once he leaves your Dalet Amos, then Yoshev, you can sit. However, Av Bezdin over, if you have an Av Bezdin, Omid Milafanav Malo Einav, the second you see an Av Bezdin, yesterday I asked this question without knowing, and clearly my Amaratzos, the Gemara is going to discuss it. I tried to compare an Av Bezdin to a Nasi. That's incorrect. An Av Bezdin is its own category. And in Av Bezdin, when you see him, you have to stand up from when you see him. And when the Av Bezdin leaves your Dalet Amos, then you can sit down. Nasi over, if there's a Nasi passing by, Omid Milafanav Mimelo Einav, Omeid Milafanav Milo Einav, well, you should stand up from the moment you see the Nasi. And you're not allowed to sit down until he sits down. This is the shvach of Moshe. That Moshe was so great that he was the head of everything. He was the Nasi in this case, based on the description of the Gemara. And there, that they had to stand up until he got to where he was going. We'll stop right here. Wishing you all a beautiful Yontif, a beautiful Rosh Hashanah, a ksiva v'chasima tova to you and your family, and may the learning that you do be a schus for a beautiful year for you. V'chol mi shalos libchem should be answered l'tova.